Hey guys, welcome to our podcast and our message for the week. And as we continue our theme focusing on the women in our lives, especially mothers, I have a lovely lady, Erica Smith, who represents mothers. Even though she is not a mother, she works in women's ministries of the North American division of Southern Adventist. She has an interesting background, and I've had some conversation with her, and I'm excited to hear her perspectives on how we as men can do a better job at supporting the women in our lives and empowering them and also protecting them. So I'm going to be reading Erica's bio, and just hang with me here. Erica Smith serves as the Assistant Director of Women's Ministries for the North American Division. She is passionate about mentoring teen girls and providing education on abuse prevention and response. Erica received her undergrad degree in English from Southern Adventist University, after which she accepted a position in the General Conference Youth Department as an editorial assistant, where she served for 4 years before transitioning to the NAD Women's Ministries. She received a master's degree in professional counseling from Liberty University in 2022, just a few years ago, and so congratulations on that accomplishment. One of Erica's greatest desires is to empower young women to have the tools to make wise choices in their relationships, recognizing that the choices they make now will impact them for their entire lives. Erica lives in Maryland with her husband, Gavin, where she also co-manages an animal rescue and spends time with her pets, Boots, Max, and Lily. So let's welcome Erica to the show. And I just want you, Erica, to just feel comfortable, but tell us a little bit about your journey, particularly in your early life and then on through, a little bit of your educational pathways, the things that you got excited about that actually probably play a role in what you're doing. Everything kind of connects. The older we get, we see the dots connecting, and it's kind of exciting. So I'm just kind of laying it out there.
Yeah, thanks, Marty. Yeah, when you talk about connecting the dots, I really resonate with that, because there were times where, as I have a colleague who says, sometimes you're standing on the dot, you're standing on it, but you can't see the next one, and you can't connect it to the one behind you, but eventually you start connecting these dots. Yep. So when I was studying English and journalism at Southern Adventist University, I was positive I was going to be a magazine editor. That was my dream. I was positive that's what I was going to do. And God had very different plans. I had done an internship for the General Conference. Being born and raised in Maryland, the General Conference was right down the road from where I grew up. And so I did an internship there for the Adventist Review, and I'm going, this is great. This is on my path. I'm editing, I'm writing. So senior year at Southern, getting ready to graduate, and the General Conference calls and says, hey, we don't have anything with the Review, but would you be interested in doing editorial work for the youth department? Great. Still in my field, and we work with the youth department. I'm going back home. So worked for the youth department for 4 years and was given such great opportunities. Really, it's my first boss ever. And I just have to say, when you're mentoring young people, the ability to see what they can't, to see what their potential is before they can, is so important. And he put me in roles that I questioned at the time, but he said, I know you can do this. I know you can do this, and gave me the tools to do it successfully. So really great experience. But I got to the point where I was ready for something different. Without going into too many details, I sort of cautiously interviewed for the women's ministries role at NAD. I thought, women's ministries? I'm way too young for that. That's tea parties and knitting and, no, I'm not doing that. Yep. But again, long story short, that's where I was called to be. I knew that's what I was supposed to do. And so really one thing led to another, and I realized that there was an opportunity for me as a younger woman serving at the level to minister to teens. There's kind of this gap. We do children's ministries really well, and you've got women's ministries, which is geared to people who, are probably married, have kids, or are grandmothers. This teen, young, college age for women, it's a tough time. And yeah, so I started looking at what I could do in those areas. And with that came into now doing abuse prevention. And again, that was something that sort of was dropped in my lap. And I thought, what do I do with this? I have no experience with this. But along the way, God just kept connecting the dots. And so here I am years later running a mentoring program for young women, managing the End It Now initiative for the North American division. And it's really just been a privilege to serve in that way and to see how God took me from what I thought was going to be my life and what his will for me was. And it's very different than what I expected, but I love it.
That's awesome. You know, as you were talking about, you know, this in-between zone, I think what you hit there is really a big one. And it's the heart and soul where you're at in your career path. And I see some of the similar things in the area of men's ministry. There's a lack of some important pieces in some of the most important stages of life. I'm a wordsmith kind of guy. I love words. I taught biology for years, so I like breaking words apart and studying them because in them is great understanding, I found. And so I thought about, you know, my wife and I had this conversation, and it was, you know, you start out and you're very dependent, you know, and then you're working your way to independence, right? Yeah. And so we have this in between stage that you're not dependent and you're not totally independent. And if you take away both of the prefixes, you're just pendant, which means you're just kind of hanging around, right?
True. Yeah.
It is kind of hanging around, and you're in this funky place where you've got a lot of tools on the real raw level to function as an adult, but yet you just are lacking the experience. And so a lot of stupid can happen. Yeah. And so I think this mentoring idea is huge. So I want to hear more about that in particular.
Yeah, well, we also have to understand, we also have to understand that teenagers are, we're asking them to start behaving like adults when the part of the prefrontal lobe, which is responsible for logic and decision making, is not fully developed until our late 20s, right? So we're saying to our teenagers, we want you to behave like this and do this and start being responsible, and they're not even biologically fully developed to a place where they can make logical decisions and be rational all the time and think about think through all the consequences of their actions. Research also shows they're primed. They're in this prime time of wanting to take some risks and going along with the group. And so some of the things that adults kind of rail against with our young people, they're railing against nature. They're railing against biology.
Right.
So what I've tried to do with our program is, one, no question is off limits in my book. I think as a faith community, if we aren't willing to say, ask us anything,
right,
and if I don't have the answer, let's find it together. They have so many other places to go to find those answers. Yep. I want them to come to us, but that involves some discomfort at times, some challenges. We're always sort of in our community, we're kind of, there's this tension between, but this is how we're supposed to live and how we're supposed to behave. But our kids are going, yeah, I know that. I know that's where you want me to be, but I'm wrestling with this stuff and I have nowhere to go. Well, right. We should be having our doors should be able to say, hey, let's wrestle this together. And if we're honest, those of us who are over the age of 21, when we look back and we're really reflective, we wrestled with things. And if we're even more honest, we're still wrestling with things that we may not go about talking about publicly and with everybody that we meet, but we wrestle. And our kids want to see that little bit of vulnerability and transparency and see that we're humans too. So yeah, I love that. they're still dependent on their family unit for a lot of things. We're asking them, we want to teach them independence because eventually we want them to be able to kind of stand on their own 2 feet, but they're in this weird middle place. It's hard.
I want to, because everything connects, the connecting points. I want to bring it into this space where parents, particularly, I think that one thing that the church at large has done is sometimes removed responsibility from parents in our effort to do good things because parents aren't doing it. We as a church, professionals, whatever, are stepping in the gap and instead of equipping parents a little bit better. You know what I'm saying? We need all aspects, promise you. But
Sure.
We need to do, I think, a better job at equipping parents because in the end, they're always going to be mom and dad.
Absolutely.
So with this idea of, this space where these conversations and getting ready to launch, we hear a lot of this that young people, especially our younger men, I'll just be honest, are failure to launch, still struggling at the age of 30 and can't quite get it together. What do you see from your journey in life and your studies and now what you do professionally, what do you think are some practical things that mothers can do and fathers can do as well, kind of teaming up here, but particularly a mother? What can a mother do? Because I think mothers inherently mother.
Sure.
If you get my drift here, and mothers, they do what they do, but they want to make sure the child is safe to the point of sometimes smothering.
Right.
The mother that smothers. I want my child to be safe, and actually it hurts the child. I tell the story that when I was teaching outdoor leadership, there was this guy by the name of Willie Unseld. He was one of the early pioneer climbers of Mount Everest, and he was leading teenagers into the wilderness of Colorado and Wyoming on these month-long trips. And a mother was dropping her son off, her teenage boy, her pride and joy, and he's going to be out in the wilderness for a whole month. And she is dropping him off, and Willie is there. And she says, now, you can promise me he's going to be safe, right? And Willie just kind of paused and looked at her, and he said, ma'am, I can't promise you that. But I can promise you this one thing. If you take him home and try to protect him, you'll kill his soul. Mm. And so I love that story because I think there's this tension that exists where we need to be giving them freedom where they can maybe do a little crash and burn kind of stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
Telling them, you equip them to launch, and if they have a little struggle, it's okay. You can figure this out. I believe in you. Anyway, I probably muddied that really well for you.
No, I think across the board we're seeing the next generation coming up that they really don't know how to fail. Failure is not an option. There's more competition than ever. There's more comparison than ever. Yes. And so the idea of failing just simply isn't on the table. Well, I think my generation, to some extent, and the generations before me, that was life. Failure was inevitable. And so your option was to bounce back or not. I mean, resilience is one of my favorite words. I use it with clients all the time. Yep. What is resiliency? What does it look like? And I want our kids to understand that. And so when it comes to parenting for both mothers and fathers, I think the idea of, for so long, and rightly so, they're thinking, what do I do to create the perfect child? Okay, for lack of a better description, what do I do to create the perfect son or the perfect daughter? Yeah. Well, at a certain point, I want parents to start asking, how do I instill values and tools that are going to make this a person who knows how to bounce back, who knows how to say, yes, I want to be successful. This is what success for me. This is how I define it. But if I fail, if I don't make it, How do I learn from that? And how do I keep moving forward? I obviously specifically, counsel and mentor young women specifically, but I think across the board, young men and young women they're very competitive. They're comparing themselves to everything that they see online. And so one of the things that I would say, especially to moms of sons, being a woman myself, is not only what kind of son do you want to develop, what kind of future husband do you want to develop? So when you're not allowing him to fall, to learn, to grow, to make mistakes, all these things, and to give him the tools to say, how do I figure this out? How do you expect him to be a good partner? Right? If you're doing everything for him, and I'm talking about things like cleaning and helping around the house and doing things outside, all of the things that go into what most women would say, I want that in a partner. How are you teaching him to do those things? Because otherwise you end up preparing somebody for a marriage where the woman becomes the babysitter or the mother instead of equal partners.
Okay, so let me just throw this question out here, because there's so many factors that at play in society right now. But one of the things that we see is that, basically, I think it's 22% is the latest statistic of children that are being raised without a father in the home. Mm-hmm. I know maybe in a church setting, it's maybe not the same, but it's still higher than what we'd like.
Yeah.
What is your take on how that is affecting those experiences?
I resonate with that because I currently have I only counsel female clients at this time. That's my population that I work with. And at this point, all of the women that I counsel are mothers to children with no father in the picture. I think about one in particular who, think about being, whether it's a son or a daughter, but to feel like somebody didn't choose you, right? That's really what it comes down to. There's rejection, in an adult relationship where you can kind of understand maybe, and you can rationalize, and you can go through this thing of, why did this person walk away? Why wasn't I good enough? That's hard enough. But as a child growing up, to think there was this person who just decided I wasn't worth it. I wasn't enough. What did I do? What did I not do? What's wrong with me that this person isn't around? Now, I will also say that I have experience with clients and with friends who I would tell you, knowing the fathers that they would have had, maybe it was a blessing that person was not in their life. But I have several women that I work with whose fathers, when they were teenagers, just either some of them are in prison, some of them are dead. So, it's a very sad state of affairs, because God created man and woman for a reason. We need both. We need the inputs of both in our through developmental stages and through life. I think when I specifically think about when you're raising teenagers, what sons and daughters need, I think is different from a mom and from a father. And specifically when I talk to these young women, they are looking for acceptance from anywhere they can get it, because they're not getting it at home from the person they most desire it from. And that's dad. Yep. That's dad. They're looking to dad, not just to say, how'd you do on that test? Did you get into that school? Did you win your game? Right? But to say, no matter what, win, lose, draw, you're valuable, you're worthy, and really kind of instilling into our kids how valuable they are regardless of the wins, right? Everything in their world is already telling them, you got to be the best. You got to be the best. And that's where I think parents can do something where maybe, like you were talking about, the organization, the church structure can't, is to say, when you fail, you don't become a failure.
Mm.
Okay. When you lose, you're not a loser. It's an inevitable part of life, and we will still be here. And what we think of you innately does not change,
right,
based on things that will change.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're finding all their worth from grades and games and hobbies, and they're hanging all of these external factors that can change in an instant. What they need from parents is stability, and especially girls with their dads, to be able to feel like, and it sounds superficial, but it's not, to know that dad loves me no matter what. He will be here no matter what.
Yep. So good. Yeah, it's unfortunately for most of us, whether moms or dads, we don't really figure things out till it's too late. It's I look back at my journey, marriage, raising children. It's only in my post raising children stage that I've really come aware of a lot of things. And yet I was somebody that worked in education for all these years. I knew my subject and I taught well, but a lot of that more interpersonal guidance was not as strong as it could have been. And I think I'm good at it. I just didn't invest in it. That makes any sense. One of my favorite texts that it's kind of a tangential way of getting to this, but it's 1 Timothy 3:16 and 17. All scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the man, the woman, the child of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. So what I'd like to say is that if Jesus became flesh, if the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, if that's our model, we're a blueprint for men. Jesus is a blueprint. You look for him. And so if that is indeed true, that God's word comes into us as men and women, as mothers and fathers, and it's supposed to just flow from us into our children. The four aspects are teaching and rebuking. Those are couples. That's a couple. Yeah. It's words. And that's usually where we stop.
Yep, exactly.
As parents, because it's expedient.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't get it the first time, telling them what to do. I will tell you angrily, rebuking you that you didn't do it right, and maybe I'll give some consequence. But the second part is really where the rubber meets the road for a lot of children, and that is correcting and training. I mean, you got to get your hands dirty. You got to come alongside them. You've got to, and I'll just, this one story is personal, because my wife, one evening, she came to me and said, "Honey, you need to go talk to our daughter." And she was just one of those mid-teenage moments.
Mm-hmm.
And I had one of these very strong conversations with her, basically saying, no matter what you do, no matter how you treat us, I'm always going to be your dad. I'm always going to love you. Just know that. But this is what we need you to do right now. And I just left. I walked out the door. But I let her think about it. I gave her that real strong, we're not fudging on this, but I love you, and this is never going to change. And the reason we're wanting you to do this, or whatever it was, I can't remember, of course, is that it's for your good. It's not to make us happy. It's because in the end, we know it's going to be for your best. But those are the kind of things that I think that many of us dads, especially the nice dads, I was one of those nice dads, nice teachers, everybody liked me. But you've got to find your voice in the strong statements as well as the loving statements. There's got to be this, because that's the way God is. Yeah. He's got this fearsome aspect, and then he's got this gentle aspect, and you got to know when to play that card. And the better you can do that, the better your parenting.
Yeah. And I find that a lot of, again, I mostly work with young women, but I find that a lot of young women tend to, without recognizing it, they tend to view God the same way that they view their father.
Exactly.
So your best tool as a parent is your example.
Yep.
And just like you're saying, kids, you can look at the research on this. On the other end is having boundaries. Teenagers want boundaries, right? They also want conversation and discussion to have a voice, but they do want boundaries. But yeah, if it's done out of anger and not out of love, if there is no balance, if it's rules all the time, I love what you said about this is for your good. I find that a lot of our kids, that's how they see God as a God of rules and restrictions.
Yes.
And I get it. I was there once. In this part of my life, I go, wow, God, now I understand that all those rules and restrictions are really freedom for me. When I live within your boundaries, that's where I find freedom because you set all of that up for my good. But our kids are looking to us to say, how are you living the way that are you talking the talk, walking the walk? Are you doing this out of love or are you doing this out of fear or out of anger? They're watching those things. And especially in our community, all of the adults that are in their lives that they're looking up to, they're going, if that's what it looks like to have Jesus in your life, I don't need that. I don't need the judgment. I don't need the hypocrisy. I don't have time for that. Right. But on the other end of the spectrum, when we get it right, it has huge ramifications. And I'll tell you, you said, we figure it out too late. But I say to parents all the time, it's never too late, ever, ever to say, say, I'm sorry, or I did not get that right, or I wish I had a do-over. I mean, it's never too late to say that, whether to, your kid or a teenager or your adult child. I never think it's too late to say, hey, I didn't get that right. And
we've got a little bit of time here before we wrap up, but a couple of questions. Number one of the biggest complaints from women that are, in the church that are striving to be the super moms, they feel many times that their husband is not providing the spiritual leadership that she was like, or at least spiritual partnership that she was like. I don't know if you want to speak to that. What do you see?
Well, I'll tell you, and I don't think this is coming from my bias, but maybe it is. Women tend to be, we make up the majority of the church. Number one, women make up the majority percentage of the church, and we tend to be the spiritual motivators in the family, in the church. And so, yeah, I do think this feeling of, I felt that in my first marriage. I say that I'm thankful that we did not have kids because that was not meant to be. But I would have absolutely, had we had children, been the spiritual leader in our home and would have had to be dragging him to church, or explaining to our children why he wasn't there. I think there is, in some ways, a feeling that they're taken for granted in that way, right? The mom, most often, not all the time, but think about this. The mother gets up on Sabbath morning, and in most families, makes everybody breakfast, gets herself ready, gets the kids ready, to get them on time to Sabbath school and all that. And maybe dad goes, maybe he goes to his own Sabbath school, or mom sits in, the kids' Sabbath school classes with them, depending on ages, all this kind of stuff. And I think to some extent, there's a feeling that that's the way it almost becomes part of the home life. That's just another one of mom's home tasks, instead of the dad really being incorporated into that whole structure of the day. Right. And it's just one of those things that I think a lot of times is not necessarily purposeful. It's just taken for granted that she's going to do that. And it doesn't have to be complicated. I think if somebody heard that wasn't doing that, and he's going, I work all week, I'm tired, it's hard for me to even think about putting a suit on again on Sabbath and getting the kids there. But it doesn't have to be complicated. It's, even if you I always say something's better than nothing. So if it's starting one evening a week, whether that's Friday evening or another evening, to say that he's going to just sit and do nothing but we're going to read a Bible story together. I don't know how, it obviously depends how old your kids are, but taking the lead in one area, or saying to his wife, I recognize you've been doing a lot of the work on Sabbath. This isn't a day of rest for you. What would be helpful? The best question in the world to ask your spouse, what would be helpful to you now? So yeah, I don't think it's necessarily on purpose. I think it's just kind of one of those things that's become another one of those, that's mom's thing, and she's been doing it. And a lot of women will keep on doing it because that's the way it's been. And so until somebody stops and says, hey, what would be helpful, it's probably going to keep happening that way.
On the guy's side of the equation, the one thing that, because really where this conversation I want it to be helpful is, how can moms and dads work together better? We know the deficits. I'm very aware of the deficits of men in the spiritual leadership and doing things that she needs help with. But on the flip side, I tell women, my wife and I have done a lot of premarital counseling and even some marital counseling on a professional level with Trip Hair and Rich.
Yeah.
And, just saying, hey, you as a woman have a power in your tongue that you're not really fully aware of. You have a prophetic voice as well. So does a man. In other words, if you are telling your husband he's not doing it right and he's not feeling success or encouragement, it will extinguish that behavior.
Sure. And
so women, I don't think it's this give and take that has to take place. Men don't come into, because, let's face it, this just didn't happen overnight. This has been a problem generationally that men have not. It's kind of like, Lord, why did you not give the spiritual leadership to women? They get the relational thing. They get the communication thing a lot better than guys.
Right.
But he chose men to take a significant lead, and it's like, okay, but I've noticed this with God. He does things the hard way to show his love and grace and power through the difficult. Why did he choose the disciples? Right. Seems like he could have picked some more qualified guys,
Right.
So anyway, I know that's kind of a little bit of a rant, but I think that really this communication piece between the two, honey, I'm doing all this. I need you to do this, and I appreciate it. And tell him how much you appreciate it. And then she should hear from him how much he appreciates everything that she does. Yeah. When we're not appreciated and valued, it becomes a heavy burden, So I see that both sides, but I'm speaking to men because that's my audience, guys, jump in there, ask what you could do to help, and when we do that, our women sense encouragement and hope. And it's part of that command for men to, basically love the church. I mean, love their wife as Christ loved the church. You've got to die a little bit. Put yourself aside. Right. I don't care how tired you are. She's tired too. She's probably more tired than you, bucko.
It's always a two-way street. I always say, whether in any marriage, even that fails, it's always there's always two sides to every story, and it's always a two-way street. Takes two to make it and two to break it. Communication is huge. It's what I spend most of the time in counseling sessions. That's what most of it revolves around, is how are we speaking? How are we listening? How are we interpreting what people say? And so appreciation goes a really long way. Even if maybe tasks can't be changed necessarily for one reason or another, appreciation can change a lot.
Let me, as we wrap up here, I want to at least touch on what you do in your realm right now with, the area of abuse and all that kind of thing. And it kind of plays into this topic here. When there's frustration that builds and it's unresolved, it can play out into bad behavior at every level. So end it now. Just tell us a little bit about that. Give a plug for that. And as it relates to even this topic.
Yeah, so End It Now is an initiative of the North American Division for Abuse Prevention Response. We have for many years provided free training online on different aspects of just the dynamics of abuse in all kinds of in all of its forms in relationships, and then also on child abuse prevention response in our context of churches and schools. So we are now moving towards in-person training. We are providing a certification process that's called End It Now Advocacy. So our next training is in September in New Orleans. You can find information about that on enditnownorthamerica.org. But we are committed as a church. We are committed to bringing awareness to the fact that abuse absolutely happens in our community, in our churches and schools. In fact, we have research that shows that on any given Sabbath, the statistics show that abuse in our community, in the Seventh-day Adventist community, is happening at the same rate of secular society. We are not any better. So on any given Sabbath, you're sitting in church with people who are living this. And so we're really encouraging people to go through the training and become equipped with procedures and policies and understanding how to, when somebody discloses that this is happening to them, how to refer them and get them to help. Because unfortunately, as a church, we have not always done that well. We have actually created more trauma by saying to a victim, I can't believe he's doing that. I can't imagine him acting like that when he's my elder, my deacon, my pastor, whoever it is. And of course, both men and women can be victims. I always have to say that. Yep. But, for all intents and purposes, women suffer at a higher rate than men do. So that's what we're trying to do is create advocates at the grassroots level in every church to have resources readily available for the people who need it. It sends a message when we have resources in our churches and our schools to say, our church is aware of this and we care. So all of our resources are free. It's a difficult journey. It's a difficult journey to undo years and years of, many faith organizations have gone through this, where you go, the gut instinct is to say that doesn't happen here. That's the instinctual reaction. That just can't happen here. We're good people. We're Christians. And unfortunately, we're sinful human beings, and it does happen in our church.
Just a practical question here. A lot of education, a lot of attempts at prevention, awareness, being able to detect signs, whatever. Is there a plan for measuring the efficacy? In other words, is there going to be a reduction in abuse? That should be obviously the goal.
Yes, it is. So that's why we've really moved away from just holding, seminars online and not having any way to follow up or to have any level of accountability. So we started last November. We trained 35 people So far, getting into September, we've got 100 people registered. We're hoping for more. But yes, there is an assessment part of this with the person in order to even receive the certificate. And then there's follow-up meetings to check in and say, how is this going for you? How are you managing things? This is going to be, we're not going to see evidence in terms of those numbers coming down for several years, obviously. But yes, yeah, we have protocols in place for that. And, at the end of the day, I have had several victim survivors say, this may not have changed what happened to me, but what you're training people to do is to understand what happened to me and to provide the support that I so desperately need. I've had victim survivors say, yeah, I've healed now. Nobody was there for me back then, but to see that my church is doing this now.
Yeah,
so
there's a level of comfort.
Yeah.
I know, Erica, one of the things that I teach is this framework of survival as a way to work with groups, to be a church leader, to be a leader in the home. And that is the first thing in survival is medical, who's hurting. And then after that, communication, and then a shelter, and then fire, and then finally water and food. But that first one, medical, to me is just representative of, are we even aware of the pain of the people around us? And that's what I love about the authenticity that we are able to generate in our men's small groups. Because guys, what I see about most guys, and this is what I get excited about, is you can't get better until you unpack the past and seek forgiveness and restoration. And then you can let go of all of that weight and that encumberment and be able to move forward. And I find that when guys do that, they feel this, it's clean. I'm clean of the past. I've let it go. I know I'm forgiven. I'm in this restorative process, and it empowers a man to lead spiritually. What I find most of the time is with guys, the reason guys aren't leading spiritually is they didn't see it well by their dad. And number two, they have stuff in their past that they feel this, Satan gets into the head, you're unworthy of leading and your wife does such a good job. Mm-hmm. And you're going to mess it up. And so unless there's some pathway of bringing guys out of that mire, they can't, you can tell them all day long and nothing's going to change. Like I said earlier when we were talking offline, it's a hard situation. When God, His Holy Spirit, gets into the heart of a man or a woman and does the deep work, then things can change. And that's my greatest prayer for all of us in whatever ministry we're involved in, working with people, is that in some small way, every day we're able to nudge people that direction.
Absolutely.
So
I'm hopeful of that. I've seen it and experienced it, and I'm hopeful.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate what you're doing, and I want to hear more later on. But I'm intrigued to hear about this End It Now program, and I think that we all have these titles, and we go end it. Are we going to end it? Well, we're not going to end it, but we're going to end it for that one person. Evil will be rampant until the end, but we can make a difference for the one.
Yeah. And I always tell people that we may not see, people, we have this word that, especially in the United States, we talk about justice. And
yes.
in the context of abuse and domestic violence, that word gets thrown out a lot. And in our context, in a faith community, I tell people all the time, we may not see justice done here, but justice is coming, my friends. It is coming in the end. And, if it's not good, it's because He's not done yet.
Right.
Done yet, but it's coming.
Well, thank you again. And I just want to close out with a prayer. I always like to do that at the end. A prayer blessing for you, Erica, okay?
Thank you.
Father in heaven, we thank you so much for this conversation. And I just sense within this young woman, Erica Smith, that you have blessed her with talents and abilities to do great things. And for just that one, I think that's the beauty of ministry is we want to do things on a grand scale, but we must never miss out on the one in front of us. And that's a message for each man or woman that might listen to this message, is that it's that one that is in front of us right now. How can I bring comfort? How can I bring encouragement? And especially to the men, their spouse, their wife, the mother of their children may be struggling in ways they don't even know. Help them to take the time to ask the right questions and to be safe, that there can be the appropriate responses. That's my real big prayer, is that we can just have these open lines of communication, open the heart, so that your healing can be done, that only you can do. But help us not to get in the way. Help us to be part of that process. You use us, and it's a wonderful thing that you honor us to do. So may we do that as men, as women, with our families. That is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Erica, and we might have you again on another connected topic, I'm sure.
Yeah, my pleasure, Marty. Be happy to.
All right. Take care. See ya.